I'm Kathryn Nelson. I'm from Queen's University, and I'm going to talk about culture, attitudes, building bridges to mitigate human-wildlife conflict. Cultural intermediaries are the gatekeepers and tastemakers of Western society. They can transform how we view the world, since they establish our cultural practices. Their influence frequently extends beyond the arts into the sciences. They are publishers, literary agents, editors, curators, film and television producers, art dealers, and arts administrators. They are often crucial in how we appreciate the natural world. Notably, they are often linked to the formation of emotional and cognitive knowledge. They have an association with culture, power, therefore their role in society is pivotal. Rosenberg asserts that attitudes are linked to three components: beliefs, feelings, and behaviour. Consequently, to achieve a change in behaviour, attitudes must first transform. Crucially, an individual strives for consistency and harmony in three domains, a process known as cognitive consonance. Festinger asserts that when a mismatch occurs between beliefs and feelings and behaviour, then cognitive dissonance arises, which is psychologically uncomfortable. People in this situation always aims to move from cognitive discord to harmony. Therefore, one method of achieving behavioural transformation is to challenge an individual by creating cognitive dissonance. The gatekeepers and tastemakers of culture may play a significant role in reducing human-wildlife conflict, since they are intermediaries between creative individuals like artists, writers, performers, and the public. Visual art, literature, film, and other creative manifestations can offer the public a rational appreciation of and emotional empathy for wildlife. Subsequently, the work that cultural intermediaries endorse may be critical in supporting society's re-engagement with the natural world. To fully explore cultural intermediaries' role in attitudinal change, I will now turn to the example of the wolf within the United States. The division between nature and culture is a traditional concept within Western society. The Book of Genesis has had a substantial impact on Western society's culture and nature ideology. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the seas, the birds of the sky, every creature that crawls upon it. Given this important religious text, the eradication of the wolf in Europe and the States was not unexpected. This verse provides individuals, organisations and societies with a perfect example of Bandura's moral disengagement mechanism, that of moral justification to subdue all creatures. A quote from McIntyre shows the mechanism of moral justification in action. Beginning in 1630, just 10 years after landing in the New World, the European settlers in the Massachusetts Bay colony passed a series of laws offering a cash reward to any resident who killed a wolf. This was followed by anti-wolf legislation in other colonies. Wolf killing continued and in 1818, the forests of Ohio, McIntyre argues, a war of extermination upon the bears and the wolves was undertaken. In 1856, Thoreau argued that the wolf is one of the nobler animals, and he mourned their extermination from the forests of Massachusetts. Furthermore, he believed he was living in an emasculated country. To return to the power and influence of cultural intermediaries, the publisher Houghton Mifflin was central to the nature-culture dialogue, as Luffer suggests that no other contemporary literary institution was so influential in publishing environmental concerned work. In 1863, Houghton Mifflin published a collection of essays by Thoreau. The story of Romulus and Remus being suckled by a wolf is not a meaningless fable. The founders of every state which has risen to eminence has drawn their nourishment and vigour from a similar wild source. 9 years later, in 1872, the first national park, Yellowstone, was established by the United States American Congress. Yet attitudinal change towards positive environmental behaviour did not flourish. For example, in 1900, the book The Wolf Hunter's Guide was written. The author, Corbin, argued that God wanted the American continent free of wild beasts and savage men. Corbin suggested that fishhooks should be baited to snag and tear into the wolf pups' throats or stomachs, and in the morning they could be clubbed to death, skinned, and their bodies left for the buzzards. The book was published by the Tribune Company, owned by Marshall H. Jewell. He was active in politics and was secretary of the 1893 Republican State Committee. It is difficult to gauge why he published such a book, but given Jewell's political leanings, perhaps he wanted to civilize America. Civilization at the time was synonymous with European culture. When Corbin's book was published, the wolf had already been exterminated in much of Europe. This negative attitude towards a wolf could be seen in children's storybooks. For example, the big bad wolf was a character to be feared. Feeney and Mrazek have argued that children's literary characters are highly influential in how young people understand themselves and the world. Furthermore, according to Burra and Van Attingen, childhood experience is decisive in our species' perception of nature and can be reflected in adulthood. After all, the wolf in picture books is often the only wolf that some people ever see. As Atchison and Fishbane argue, indirect exposure can inform individuals' attitudes without direct contact with, for instance, the big bad wolf. The condemnation of the wolf is clearly seen when rangers shot the last wolf in Yellowstone in 1926. As Redford said in 2019, few people at the time mourned the loss. Significantly, how wolves were portrayed in literature was beginning to change. For instance, the publisher David Nutt and Macmillan began to present the wolf more favourably, describing pack loyalty, the nurturing of the young, its bravery of spirit, its strength of character and intelligence. Books played on the empathy of the reader to fully engage the wolf as protagonist. This reappraisal of the wolf continued, and in the 1960s, attitudes began to change towards the environment. The publisher Houghton Mifflin again played a part by publishing Carson's Silent Spring, which is often considered a catalyst for the environmental movement. Houghton Mifflin can be considered vital in promoting Carson's ideology. This shows the power of the publishers as gatekeepers of knowledge and tastemakers of attitudes. This change in attitudes towards nature was eventually rewarded in the United States with the 1973 Endangered Species Act. The wolf was finally protected. In 1989, Harper Row published the story of the true story of the three little pigs, written from the point of view of the wolf. It was followed 4 years later by Viking Penguin publishing The Three Little Wolves and the Big Bad Pig. Chowdhury has argued that the content of children's storybooks reflects societal change. So perhaps it's not surprising that in 1995, 14 wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone. Yet possibly the most remarkable attitudinal transformation was the imprisonment of Chad McKedrick for killing one of Yellowstone's newly released wolves under the 1973 Act. However, this attitudinal change was not universal, since a handful of locals cheered the killing, calling it an act of heroism. Given this instability in the public's attitudes, perhaps it should have been expected that in 2011, the USA's Congress passed legislation that removed federal wolf protection and returned management back to state wildlife agencies. In 2012, just outside of Yellowstone, the shooting of a female wolf caused an international outcry. Her killer was not imprisoned because he was acting legally. So what had happened in the 17 years from wolf reintroduction to wolf killing? Perhaps Friending's ideas on cognitive dissonance can provide further insight. For instance, the people living close to Yellowstone may still hold to the conviction that such creatures should be subdued. Yet internationally, attitudes to the wolf had fundamentally changed. This cognitive separation is perhaps key in understanding the different attitudes towards the wolf. Finally, how can a deeply ingrained negative conviction be transformed? Krosrick and Kasneska research may provide some insight. They suggest that the arts have emotional, social, and intellectual dimensions. Cultural experience is likely to be influential in attitudinal and behavioural change. Furthermore, they argue that it is necessary to recognise the multifaceted character of cultural experiences, with emotional and cognitive elements alongside broader social reverberations. Yet it's not simply the writers that influence Western culture, but also the publishers in their role of cultural intermediaries. Yet this still has not been enough to fully support positive environmental awareness. So what is the next stage? Given cultural intermediaries' significant impact on Western culture, they may still be key. Perhaps in their guise as arts managers, they could offer social interactive wildlife arts projects, thus creating new ways of seeing nature, eventually achieving behavioural transformation by challenging beliefs, feelings and attitudes, which in turn may eventually support human-wildlife coexistence. Oh, I forgot that one. Thank you for listening.